All right, welcome back, everybody. Last week we ran a one shot of Ryuutama where Joe let us in on Ronin's Den for our episode of Winry's whimsical one shots. And this week we're going to do our standard system breakdown, talk about what we liked about the game, what we didn't like about it on a mechanical aspect, and who and we'd recommend it to and for what purpose. So let's start off with Benny.
Where would you like me to start?
At the beginning, hopefully right before you went to the circus or didn't go to the circus.
So, actually, if we're starting at the beginning with any system for me is character creation. And I really wish it would become more of a standard thing in the TTRPG space for books to just have pre-gen character sheets in the player's handbook for whatever game it is. With all that being said, character creation for this system was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And I really appreciated that Joe was nice enough to walk me through it. But as opposed to something like Legends of Kralis, where like get comfortable because you're in for a solid hour adventure just making your character, this was pretty straightforward, and I really appreciated that about the system. And I don't want to ramble too long, so I'm going to pass it to Dragon for your thoughts before I say anything else.
Uh, Starting at the beginning, I didn't create my own character. I had a pre-gen. Looking at the rulebook afterwards, I'm very easily could have made my own. I agree with Benny that the character creation aspect was really simple. It's very similar to Fabula Ultima. It's a character that you can make in a couple minutes, honestly, if you really know what you're doing. Like you said, in contrast to some games, I agree games should have pre-generated characters. Like every system, it should be just standard at this point. But for the most part, the character creation pretty simple and straightforward. Eric?
I was going to say I did the same thing. I got a pre-gen, but then I went back, looked at the rules afterwards for that part, and yeah, no, it's a pretty simple process. I did enjoy the character play as well. Like the character creation led to a character that was easy to play and intuitive. It wasn't a lot of messy things of overly complicated mechanics for complications' sake.
Can't die in creation, that's for sure. Um, I'm again as the GM, I do want to say that like the creation was fairly simple. The only reason I even went out of the way to do pre-gen, and technically you didn't do a pre-gen. I just like narrated the character creation to you with the little thing I did. I just asked you the same questions you would have gone through on the book your own yourself. So technically you made your own characters. We just, I kind of like just did most of the actual grunt work for it.
We appreciate
but yeah, I think going to the idea of the pre-generated characters and the character play that led to a pre-generated character in the book, that's pretty standard. Like in Japan, where this game was originally designed, a big thing that they have that gets released. And I think some of the ones that are coming out over here now have what's called replays, and replays are almost like arguably they were ahead of their time. They were the actual plays or whatever that we have now, but they were people recording their sessions and then publishing them in script form for people to read through later. So I think they work really well, and they've been doing that since like the 80s in Japan. It's been a huge deal over there since then. Record of Lodoss War, the anime, started as someone's D&D replay, which I thought was really, really freaking fascinating. So the character creation, the pre-gens, things like that, that's a pretty standard setup over there. I can appreciate that it has a character sheet in the book with the stats filled out in it properly for you to see exactly how it's going to work. And I even think some RPGs now do that over here and have done it for a little bit. I hate to use this as an example, but I feel like there's like in the D&D 5th edition core book, there's a page that has a character sheet and circles where all the stuff goes. I could be wrong, but I feel like I've seen that before. But not granted, I do agree. Not a lot do that, and they should. Shadowrun has had pre-gens in their core books since like at least first or second edition, but they're always their own custom splat pages. They're never on a character sheet for you. They're always just, here's all the stuff, just know where to roll. That's it.
Yep. And the splat pages for those also look very different from the actual character sheets that they provide. So,
and they get more different. At least in like first and second edition, they were like, here's a blank white page with the numbers on it and a picture of your character. And then like starting in third edition, they're like, here's this really cool artistic page you're never going to want to print out because it'll kill your printer, with all the stuff on it.
Yep. Moving into just general play of the game. How do you feel about that, Benny?
It was a pretty smooth system, something that I wasn't ready for, and I want to be clear before I get into it. I do not mean this as a complaint, but I was playing a minstrel, so I was expecting something comparable to a bard in D&D, and it did have some of those aspects, I think, but something a lot of systems do, especially systems that are very combat-centric, do is in an effort to make everything to everyone, you wind up with these character types that wind up being very generic and or overpowered. Like you have something that's great in every situation, like the D&D bard can be. And my character was not that. My part of it was that I didn't know the mechanics all that well, but my character was not optimized for combat at all, which I actually appreciated because I felt like the exploration and social mechanics of the game were better optimized, and you could have a much fuller gameplay experience without necessarily relying on combat for it.
Yeah, I have no complaints really. I think the system did what it intended to do. It gave the vibe that it intended to give. I truly just enjoyed the game. I liked the mechanics. They're simple, yet how do I want to put it? They're simple, but there is a little bit of bite to them. Not like in the sense that it's crunchy or anything, but it's not so loosey-goosey that it's unusable. There was something there that you could sink into. So I appreciated it a lot.
Would an example of that be the battle map that gave you positions but didn't get into movement speeds and flanking and all that?
Yeah, like there's front and there's back. That's a good example. It felt like there was enough there to sink your teeth into and really hammer it out, but at the same time it wasn't Fate levels of, oh, well, whatever you feel like, man.
Yeah, I liked how, so I played a noble with some magic, and the mechanics for my character were really simplistic, but that tangle spell, I can't remember what it was called, Briarthorn, I think, where I was able to...
Briar Cotto or something?
Yeah, something like that. I was able to do a teensy bit of damage, but also drastically reduce the enemy's initiative times so that other people could go beforehand.
Which reducing initiative also decreased their target number to be hit.
Exactly. So it made them easier to be hit. It made them act later in the combat round. And I could see how this incredibly simple system with not a lot of rules quantity had a good quality rule set that everybody could play off of each other on. And you didn't need to spend 6 months learning how to optimize. You could just go, okay, I'm going to go ahead and reduce their initiative and make them easier to hit. I'm going to use my area effect damage spell now. Oh, I'm going to do a barrage of arrows, or I'm going to do this social test to try and intimidate them and make them run away because their target numbers are reduced because they're afraid, because they're snared. I really like that. It was definitely quality over quantity of the rules system.
I think one of the things I really do enjoy about Ryuutama, and to an extent whenever I read through Fabula Ultima, because for those that have not seen either or only seen one, even in the beginning of Fabula Ultima's book, it talks about the rules and stuff here are inspired by, and it uses Ryuutama as one of the examples. But I like the idea that it's meant to replicate a certain type of video game experience and vibe, but allowing you for the kind of versatility and freedom that like a tabletop experience would give you. Because yeah, at the end of the day, it feels like you're playing something that was crafted in a JRPG using JRPG mechanics. I can almost hear the music and see the 16-bit sprites. But you can also do things like talk your way out of a fight. You can't do that in a JRPG because it's a fight. You either flee or you punch them. So that kind of like the mechanics are there to feel like you're playing fight, flee, magic item, or you can use the fifth option and let me see if the GM will allow this. There's not a lot of that in video games, and I appreciate that. As someone who grew up on video games and then came to tabletop gaming, I have a friend that always complains about his issues with the newer generation of tabletop gaming and tabletop gamers is there's too much video gaming in it. And I kind of feel like he's not wrong, but he also just doesn't get it, that's not always a detriment. That can be a boon. And I think this is a really solid example of when it's a boon. Because it's the emphasis on mechanics that you don't have to have a computer or a spreadsheet or anything like that to help you solve, which as much as we've talked about Shadowrun already, as much as I love Shadowrun, I remember spreadsheets for gear tracking, and I don't necessarily need that in all of my in all of my tabletop games. And Ryuutama is one of those. Though it comes close. Its gear stuff does come close.
I did notice that with a lot of the effects, like the rain boots that I had were super handy. And I could see building a cache of inventory, each with a bunch of different effects, and the amount of paper I would need to keep track of all of that.
Right.
Yeah, because like being able to buy a raincoat and rain boots, if you didn't have them, you were at an extreme disadvantage when you were in the rain. So it almost became a necessity that we got to buy that, which I think goes back into where I said there's enough bite in the system that it feels intuitive for how simplistic it is.
It's unlike some RPGs. Oh, go ahead, Benny.
The only thing I wasn't a fan of was there was more than one roll that you made at the beginning of each gaming day to determine effects that would happen later. And one of them, if you rolled low, I think you started at half health or something like that.
Yeah, the condition roll.
Yeah, it didn't bother the mechanic itself didn't bother me. It reminded me a little bit of the mechanic in Vampire the Masquerade, where every day you rolled to see if you get hungrier or not. And I like those kinds of mechanics, but having more than one per day seemed a little much, and also having it be something that dramatic of half your health is just gone again seemed a little much.
I feel as though when dealing with things like the condition and traveling rules, which that's what those are, it's the condition, then your navigation and your travel check and everything else. Part of that's on me because, you know, as a GM, you're supposed to kind of make that a little more dramatic and add some stuff, some commentary and some flair. I don't like traveling in games that often. That goes to me running a Jade Regent game for 3 books. And that game is literally Pathfinder the Oregon Trail, but across the North Pole. And I just, it's hard to make that interesting when you're just like, cool, well, you progress another 50 miles today. What are we going to do, team?
Die of polar bears and dysentery?
No, white dragons and liches.
So I can understand if you did a travel heavy game, but I think I kind of agree with Benny. I think having a bunch of different roles at the start of a day is a little much, where contrast that to Fabula Ultima, where you travel, you make one roll per day. Like when you travel, you roll for that day, you camp, you make another one the next day. And depending upon what you roll, you might get an encounter, you might make a discovery, you might run into a town. I think the best game out there for exploration roles is actually Forbidden Lands. And even then, it's just one roll. But there's a bunch of different jobs that people have that can modify that roll. But at the end of the day, you're still just rolling one time. So having condition, navigation, travel, etc., it becomes this really complex subsystem that I don't think it needs. But at the same time, I don't think it really detracted from the game for me specifically. But then again, I made every one of my condition rolls, so that's probably the difference.
I think part of the reason, because you brought up Fabula Ultima, and again, and comparing the two, unfortunately, makes a lot of sense because of the links between them. But Fabula Ultima came out in America or in Japan or wherever it originally came out, Italy, I think, in like what 2020,
something like that. Yeah, I think so. 2021.
Ryuutama turned 17 this year, so it's been around for a while, and I think part of the way the roles are intended to feel is indicative of the era of gaming in Japan that it came out. Possibly, I'm not an expert on necessarily that era of tabletop gaming in another country, especially one so unrelated to my own. But I think that's part of it, and part of the reason Ryuutama has more roles is I think journeying is supposed to be the intent, because the whole book is about like your characters. You come up with whatever reason you want, but in the worlds of Ryuutama, people go on journeys. So journeys.
Yeah, I get the feeling that the journey is supposed to be just as much of a entity as any of the like enemies that you'll get involved with. So it's going.
So it kind of takes it's all about the journey, not the destination, too seriously.
I think part of this is Ryuutama is definitely a game that's intended to be multiple sessions, and you lose out on some of what makes the game even a little more interesting when you're only doing a one shot. And this is not a criticism of doing it as a one shot, but there's other stuff involved that I think becomes more interesting or more tolerable when you have these longer runs for it.
Yes. So with the monsters we dealt with, like those weird egg things, like where did the eggs come from? What laid these eggs? Is their whole life cycle that they exist as eggs? Like, and even if you don't have an answer for it, it's the kind of thing where as a game master, you can pick up on, hey, this is something the players want to explore, and you can make something up later on. Or those goblin guys who were humanoid cats who wear cookware as armor, like those are the kind of things, like they're adorable. You want to find a colony of them and get to know them and help them with whatever it is they're trying to do, good or bad. I think the system did a really good job of setting up this truly Studio Ghibli or even Adventure Time style fantasy world. And there was the mention of there being this larger conflict that is happening that's so much more ominous. And I feel like that could also have a lot of potential, kind of like, well, in something like Studio Ghibli, the movies always start off with this fun, whimsical stuff, and then all of a sudden someone's parents are getting turned into pigs or something. It's like, what the hell? What just happened here? In a good way. And I feel like Ryuutama has the potential for that, but it needs to be a longer campaign for that to really work.
I like that you mentioned it has that Adventure Time feel. Adventure Time, there's a module for that coming out, but they made it 5th edition, and I felt like that was a mistake. But I feel like Ryuutama could be a great game for that. Like you said, there's this feeling of this wider world, this great fantasy imaginative realm, and we just got a tiny little piece of it. And you could even run this as an episodic thing that builds to a bigger story. So I really, really did enjoy this system.
As a quick couple of notes, first off, the whole Imperial thing, I made that up. Much like with again, talking about Fabula Ultima, when you're doing a longer campaign, it really is recommended that you sit down with the players and help them build the world, including the town they come from. And that's part of what I kind of took out for the purposes of it being a one shot. Because I didn't want to spend 10 minutes at the beginning of the session building your town and the world. It might have been fun to do and added more time, but at the same time, I just kind of wanted to get to the action. And the other thing, you talked about the Nico goblins, the little the cat people with pots on their heads and stuff. One of the free downloads you can get from Kodadama Heavy Industries website, which that's the American producer of this game, is rules for playing a Nico Goblin, as well as a handful of other stuff like another class, the sailor, and a few other things. But I thought it was a neat thing that was on there. I was like, this is meant to be kind of an introductory one-shot thing, so I don't want to get too complex and throw Nico Goblins into the mix, because they have things like, okay, you can choose what your other 2 stats are, but you have to have a might of 4 and like a agility of 8, and then the other 2 stats are up to you based on some options you have. But just generally, there's some cool stuff in there that if I was to do a longer campaign, I would take it more into consideration on like, these are some more options we could look at, and we would need to build the city that you guys come from together and things like that.
Now, there was something else that got left out of this game that we were talking about offline before we got in. The Ryujin, was it?
Yep. So a cool element of Ryuutama I didn't really go into. I had one in the back of my pocket in case it was needed, but it's a GM character called a Ryujin, and the Ryujin, there's 4 types, and they have rules on how to build them and how they're used in game. And the whole point of the Ryujin is to kind of set the tone of the game you want to run. It's recommended for your first time running the game that you run with the green Ryujin, the Midori Ryujin, Midori Ro or something is what it's called. And the Ryujin is meant to be like some backstage dragon character that is watching this adventure unfold and making notes of it, and then giving the story to the dragons to feed them, the terrestrial dragons or whatever. It's the weird, like, it's the world building almost literally part of this game. And the Ryujin have their own cool abilities that you can use to help the players or add drama to the story and stuff. And I didn't use it because the Ryujin really feels like something that's going to be there if you want like a longer story. If this was going to be like a 6 or 7 session thing, then yes, I would be more intended on having the Ryujin be maybe not visible to the player or to the characters, but to the players and to the others that might be watching or listening if we were to record and produce this. But yeah, they're interesting. And the other 3 that are there, because I did the green Ryujin for the purpose of having them in the background for this game. But the blue Ryujin is supposed to be intended for stories about like love, family, friendship, the bonds of humanity, that kind of thing. The red Ryujin is about war and competition and combat and that kind of stuff. So, if you were doing a story where everyone in the party are part of the military, that's the Ryujin you would use. And then the black Ryujin is about like espionage and social conflict and that kind of stuff, political conflict and things.
Okay. So I think the last thing will be is, who would you recommend this game for, and what types of games specifically do you think that they should run with them? I'm going to say I'd recommend it to anybody who's looking for something that has that video game kind of vibe feel to it, mechanically speaking, something a little bit rules lighter, and where they want to tell that they want to do more of like a travel, like road trip story, is where I would set this thing in. I would not use this for dungeon crawls or, like your fairly standard trad game, but something more like a Final Fantasy 15, but in Studio Ghibli fashion. Anybody?
Go ahead.
Okay. I would kind of only really use this to act as a, hey, you want to try something other than D&D, here's this. If they're literally just looking for something to try that is different enough that it's not going to be dungeon crawls and stuff like that. Like if you have someone that's already doing, I'll use Pathfinder again. If you have someone that wants to do Jade Regent, but you don't really like Pathfinder, but you want that travel game, I would also recommend this. To me, it's less about like, is it going to be traditional enough that I wouldn't recommend it, but it's more about like, are you wanting to do something with this other game that Ryuutama does well, then let me recommend Ryuutama. Because as mentioned, the rules are granular enough and directed and meaty enough that you can do a little bit with them, but they're not so heavy that it's going to get players that have only ever played one other role-playing game lost in the weeds.
I think this game is definitely, I think you do like a fun slice of life, just like you said, Studio Ghibli style game. I think it would be a contrast to something, or not a contrast. I think this would be like those people who like the game Wander Home, which is basically you just travel across the land making friends. I think this one has that combat aspect that you would add to Wander Home. So if you want a little bit more combat and like politicalness or fighting or things like that, this would be the upgrade from Wander Home. So if you're looking for that like slice of life, just having a good time while adventuring and fighting some monsters along the way, this would be the game.
If I was going to choose a non-JRPG to say like, hey, if you like this video game but wanted to do a TRPG with it, I would also say the Norse one that I can't remember anymore.
Vossen?
Yeah. No, maybe.
It's like,
It had 3 of them, and it was basically like an Oregon Trail type thing.
oh, I don't think that's Vossen.
Don't know.
Let me.
All right, go ahead, Benny.
So I'm actually going to break that question down into 2 parts, because there's a question of what game master would you recommend this to and what player would you recommend this to. For the game master, who I think is going to thrive with the system, it's somebody who's a world builder, it's somebody who wants to get in, see what's interesting to the players, and then fill it out from there. As opposed to somebody who wants to run modules wherever, or even something like Forgotten Realms, where you kind of know what the world is and the players can know too. I think the system gives a lot of freedom for that. As for the kind of player, I think it's, if you're looking for a system that's at about the level of rules as a World of Darkness game, but a much lighter and more whimsical theme to it, as opposed to this. Don't get me wrong, I love World of Darkness games. I'm looking forward to playing Werewolf in January. That being said, you might not want that crushing, bleak world, and you just want this lighter, more fun setting to play around in and travel and explore and meet cute little cat people.
All right. Go ahead, Joe.
Banner Saga was the game I was thinking of.
Okay.
Banner Saga.
Okay. As always, at the end of this, we say to give it a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, and how likely are you to play it again? Let's start with Benny for that.
Scale of 1 to 10 for a one-shot, it's actually pretty low. It's probably around a 4, just because, again, it's something that I think is conducive to a much deeper exploration of the world and the characters. Not having played in a longer-term campaign, it's hard to say for certain, but pretty high. I mean, I would be pretty interested in playing a many-session campaign of this, so I'd probably give it like a 9. And yeah, if somebody was running a campaign of this, I would definitely be there for it.
Right. Eric.
I was going to say, I'd kind of break it somewhat similar, where I'd say for one-shot play, not a great system. And we've said that about a few of the other games that we've played on this channel as well. As far as a campaign potential game, I'm going to give it a high rating too, an 8 or a 9, because it does have all of those bits and pieces for replayability, and they'll make you want to get to the next session and get those little odds and ends to get your character through the adventure completely. I got to get my rain boots, I got to get my rain jacket, an umbrella for the sun, a beach towel, whatever it is. Like I got to collect all that stuff. So I definitely have like that itch that if this was offered again, I would definitely play it again. And I could see that it's much better suited for sustained play.
I really want to see a TPK because somebody didn't have a beach towel. That's a thing I would enjoy watching.
Right?
Well, you're not supposed to forget your towel.
The whole party is down.
Towel.
Whole party is down. Your socks filled with sand. You collapse.
So
I want
I'm
that
gonna
narrated
go
by Ron Perlman.
I'm going to go a little bit different than Eric and Benny here. I think for a one shot, I don't think I'm going to go as low because I did enjoy the one shot. I think I would still give it a solid 5 or 6. I'm going to go 5.5 out of 10. As a system overall, I'm also going to go a little different. I think I'm only going to give it a 6.5 because I don't think it does anything particularly revolutionary. I think it is a good system that does what it's supposed to do, but I don't think it does anything particularly great, and I don't think it does anything revolutionary. And that's not a knock on it. Like, absolutely, I'd play it again. I would do a campaign of it in a heartbeat. But if I'm going to grade it, I think there are a lot of systems out there that do things exceptionally well. Like Alien, the last one we did, I gave that a 9 out of 10 because it does things that are revolutionary or different or like things that make it unique. And maybe that's just the fact I didn't play this long enough to see some of those things, but from a base one-shot standpoint of what I saw, I don't think it did enough for me to give it a high rating yet.
I personally think part of that is its age. Alien has the benefit of it was released 3 years ago, I think, the most recent one.
Yeah.
And Ryuutama is again 17 years old now. It's showing its age really badly. Because, and part of my rating is involved in that too. Both as a one shot and a campaign. Like as a one shot, I'm going to rate it about a 3 because again, the one shot really detracts from your ability to like lean in, learn, and use the mechanics that are intended for longer play better. And I think a game, if you really want a good one shot for a game, you can explore like most of the mechanics within that one shot. I think Fallout does that fairly well. We didn't really have the opportunity to explore the crafting system, but we had the opportunity to explore survival if we wanted to, and combat and all that other stuff. So a 3 for me for one shots. Not that it wasn't fun. It just, there are games that I think offer more for a one shot than this one would. For a long-term campaign play, I'm going to put it at about a 6 for 2 reasons. First off, when I talk about wanting campaign play, I want a game that can run mid to long campaigns. And that's anywhere from 10 to like 2 years worth of sessions or whatever, however you want to gauge that. And Ryuutama really kind of cuts off at some point because the level cap is 10. And you can probably reach that fairly quickly if you play fairly regularly. And there's nothing wrong with a game that only runs maybe 15 to 20 sessions. That's fine. But I like my games, even my favorite game like Witchcraft, Armageddon, anything from Eden Studios. That's not a game designed for extremely long campaign play. It's a game designed for medium length campaign play. And I just bothers me that Ryuutama is like that. And also everything I want from Ryuutama, Fabula Ultima now does. So like I don't, and that's not a criticism on Ryuutama. That's Ryuutama being old enough to drive and Fabula Ultima learning from it. It's Fabula Ultima having the benefit of everything Ryuutama did. So yeah, as you said, Dragon, it may not be revolutionary, but it might have been 17 years ago. We just have the hindsight of 17 years worth of games since then coming out. And doing things cooler and better and more interestingly.
There's a phenomenon my daughter described to me. There's a phenomenon my daughter described to me called Seinfeld's Not Funny, which is that if you were old enough to watch Seinfeld back in the whatever it was, the 90s, when you'd never seen anything like it, it was the funniest thing you'd ever seen. But we've now had 30 years of content that copied and built on and in some way emulated that.
Or at least learned from.
Yeah, and it's not new anymore. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Dragon. What were you saying?
Oh no, it's all good. I still find Seinfeld funny. I'm rewatching it now.
I never
but
found
anyway,
Seinfeld funny. I was always like, no, we're skipping this, and we're gonna watch something else. The Simpsons come on.
Well, I want to make it clear. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like I get it's an old system, but if I'm going to rate it based on the games that we've played this year, this is one of the least revolutionary, but it's good. is being a 6 out of 10 to me is not bad. It just means it's not doing anything. It's not trying too hard. But like you said, back 17 years ago, this might have been the most revolutionary thing out there.
As somebody who was playing games 17, 20, 30 years ago, if I was to compare this to, say, 2nd edition Dungeons & Dragons when I first started, this would have blown my mind on what it was attempting to do.
Right. Well, and the hard thing to also take into account is 17 years ago, 4th edition was about to come out.
Still 3rd edition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm just using that as an example, and I'm not, and I also want to make clear, I wasn't trying to criticize you for saying it wasn't doing anything new or revolutionary. That is the farthest thing from what I was attempting to do. I just wanted to point out that, no, it's not doing anything new. It's probably not even doing anything new in Japanese gaming anymore, but it's, we have a game that's like, oh, I learned from this. Like, Seinfeld isn't a bad example of what this could be compared to. I was going to say the Beatles. There's lots of people that may not like the Beatles, but it is hard to deny what the Beatles did to music. So I think this is a similar, not the same, but a similar circumstance, because I don't like the Beatles. I hate the Beatles, but
yeah, anyway. So, that is our breakdown of the Ryuutama system. Highly recommend that you check it out if you get the opportunity to. It was a lot of fun. A special shout out to Benny for thwarting an entire encounter with a Necomancer and his zombies. Was the highlight of the night, to be honest. So that has been Ronin's Den. I'm Steve. That's Eric. Thank you, Benny and Joe, for being here. We appreciate you guys as always, and we will catch you all in the next one.